The lawyer's office smelled of stale ambition and cheap leather. I sat across from him, my hands clenched so tight my knuckles were white mountains against my skin. He droned on about clauses and beneficiaries, his voice a dry rustle like dead leaves skittering across pavement. All I could focus on was the tremor in my own hands, a familiar, unwelcome guest. It had been years since I'd felt this way, this coiled spring of pure, unadulterated dread. He cleared his throat, a sharp, percussive sound that jolted me back. "And so, Mr. Dean, you are the sole inheritor of Blackwood Manor." Blackwood Manor. The name itself tasted like dust and decay. My grandmother. Estranged was too soft a word. She'd been a ghost in my life, a whispered warning from my parents, a specter I'd tried to outrun since I was old enough to pack a suitcase. Now, the architect of my childhood nightmares, the woman who'd kept her, was gone, and I was left with the keys to the mausoleum. I nodded, a jerky movement I hoped looked like composure. "I understand." He slid a heavy, embossed envelope across the polished desk. Inside, a single, brittle key. The drive to Blackwood Manor was a blur of grey skies and a landscape that seemed to actively reject life. Trees clawed at the horizon, their branches skeletal fingers. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of damp earth and something else. Something metallic, like old blood. My stomach churned. This was it. The place where it all began. The place where she resided. The gates of Blackwood Manor groaned open, a mournful, drawn-out shriek that echoed in the sudden stillness. The house itself loomed, a hulking silhouette against the bruised twilight. Ivy, thick and suffocating, choked the stone walls, its tendrils like grasping hands. It was even worse than I remembered. Or perhaps it was exactly as I remembered, only now. The memory was a physical weight pressing down on me. Dust motes danced in the slivers of light that dared to penetrate the gloom. The air was thick, stagnant, carrying the distinct aroma of decay and something cloying, sickly sweet, like forgotten perfume. Every surface was draped in dust sheets, giving the furniture the appearance of shrouded corpses. A grandfather clock in the corner stood silent, its pendulum frozen, as if time itself had ceased to move within these walls. I took a tentative step inside, my boots crunching on something brittle on the floor. I didn't look down. I didn't want to know. My breath hitched. This was a mistake, a terrible, colossal mistake. I should have sold it sight unseen, let the lawyers handle the dissolution of this monument to my own undoing. But a stubborn, perhaps foolish, part of me needed to see, to confirm, to finally put the ghost to rest. My gaze swept across the hall, my heart thudding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. It pressed in on my ears, a low hum that vibrated in my bones. I remembered scrambling down those stairs, my small legs pumping, a desperate flight from what? The memory was a frayed thread, impossible to grasp. A sudden gust of wind rattled a window somewhere upstairs, a sharp, percussive sound that made me jump. I spun around, my senses on high alert. Nothing. Just the house settling, I told myself, the old timbers groaning under the weight of years. I moved deeper into the house, drawn by an invisible current. I found myself in what must have been the drawing room. A portrait hung above it, the subject obscured by a thick layer of grime. I tilted my head, trying to make out the features, but it was no use. Whoever it was, they were staring out with an intensity that made my skin crawl. Then I saw it. And on the seat, nestled amongst the faded velvet cushion, was a doll. My breath caught. My vision narrowed, focusing on that single small figure. It was Leela. The same porcelain face, chipped and faded. The same vacant blue glass eyes that seemed to stare right through me. The same impassably perfect ringlets of synthetic hair, now matted and tangled. It was her, exactly as I remembered her, yet somehow more present, more aware. A wave of nausea washed over me. I could feel it, a prickling sensation on my skin, a silent scream building in my throat. This was impossible. He was supposed to be gone, thrown away, burned, yet here she sat as if he had never left, as if he had been waiting. My hands trembled again, more violently this time. I wanted to run, to flee this accursed place and never look back. The doll's painted smile seemed to widen, a silent, knowing smirk. How had she gotten here? And why did her presence feel like a brand, searing itself into my very soul? The gravel crunched under the tires, a sound too loud in the suffocating quiet. Blackwood Manor loomed, a skeletal silhouette against the bruised twilight sky. It wasn't just old, it felt worn, like a forgotten thing left to rot. The air, even through the rolled-up windows of my car, was heavy, thick with the scent of damp earth and something else, something acrid like old smoke. I killed the engine. Silence rushed in, a palpable weight pressing against my eardrums. My hand trembled as I reached for the key in my pocket. It was still unnervingly cold, a tiny shard of ice against my skin. The iron gates groaned in protest as I pushed them open, each screech a ragged breath from the house itself. The driveway, choked with weeds, wound its way to the imposing oak door. It was scarred, weathered, and strangely seemed to watch me. The lark turned with a grating shriek. Dust motes danced in the slivers of light that pierced the grimy, leaded windows. It smelled of decay, yes, but also of lavender and something metallic, like dried blood. My footsteps echoed on the marble floor, each sound swallowed by the vastness of the space. I walked deeper, my breath catching in my throat. Portraits lined the walls, their eyes seeming to follow me, the painted faces stern and judging. My grandmother. I barely remembered her, a fleeting image of grey hair and a stern mouth. Now her gaze, captured in faded oils, felt like a physical presence, an accusation. To my left, a doorway beckoned. I pushed it open. The room was a library, lined floor to ceiling with books. A thick layer of dust coated everything, softening the edges of the mahogany shelves and the worn leather of the armchairs. In the center of the room stood a large, ornate table, cluttered with what looked like old documents. My gaze fell upon a stack of newspapers, their headlines yellowed and brittle. The label on the box read, "Library with Newspaper Archives from 1970. I ran a gloved finger across the top of a newspaper. The date read October 17, 1977. I remembered this date. Vaguely. A birthday. A holiday. I picked up the newspaper, its paper crackling like dry leaves. The front page was dominated by local news, mundane stories of town council meetings and minor traffic accidents. But as I flipped through the pages, a small article tucked away on page 3 caught my eye. Local girl injured in unexplained accident. The accompanying photograph was grainy, but I recognized the street. It was near where my grandmother had lived. The article was brief, detailing a fall down a set of stairs. No witnesses, no explanation. Just a child my age then, and a broken arm. I felt a prickling sensation on the back of my neck, the unsettling feeling of being watched. I looked up from the paper. The library was silent, save for the soft hiss of the wind outside. Yet the feeling persisted. I told myself it was just the old house settling, the wind playing tricks. But the metallic tang in the air seemed stronger now, and the scent of lavender, once faint, was almost cloying. It was intricately carved, depicting scenes I couldn't quite make out in the dim light. My fingers brushed against the cool wood, tracing the raised patterns. A faint scratching sound emanated from within. I froze, straining to hear. It was faint, rhythmic, like tiny claws on wood. My heart began to beat a little faster, a dull thud against my ribs. I told myself it was a mouse or a bird trapped inside. But the sound was too deliberate, too patient. I leaned closer to the cabinet, my ear almost pressed against the wood. The scratching stopped. For a long moment, there was only the pounding of my own blood in my ears. Then, a soft, almost inaudible click. A tiny latch on the cabinet door, unseen until now, had just released. What was inside the cabinet? The air in the library with newspaper archives from 1970 hung thick with the smell of aging paper, and dust motes danced in the weak shafts of sunlight filtering through the grimy windows. It was a peculiar sort of quiet here, not the peaceful hush of a place of learning, but a suffocating silence that seemed to swallow sound. I traced the brittle edges of a newspaper clipping, my fingers tingling with a cold, alien sensation. The article about the child's fall, the one I'd found tucked away in my grandmother's desk, had led me here. I'd spent the last 2 days sifting through microfiche, my eyes burning, searching for anything else, anything that might explain the gnawing unease that had settled over me since I'd returned to this house. The old newspaper, its ink faded to a sepia blur, detailed a series of unsettling occurrences in the town decades ago. Minor incidents mostly. A string of petty thefts, a peculiar rash of animal disappearances, a local baker's inexplicable vanishing act. Nothing concrete, nothing that screamed malevolence. But the dates, they were always close. Close to the dates I remembered, close to her. I pulled another reel, the metal groaning in protest. The librarian, woman whose face seemed permanently etched with a profound weariness, had given me a look that bordered on pity when I'd requested the specific years. She hadn't asked why, and I hadn't offered. Some things were better left unsaid, unspoken, especially here. Then a small, almost insignificant item caught my eye. A brief report about a local child's toy found discarded in an alleyway. The description was vague, but a knot tightened in my stomach. It mentioned a porcelain face, unnaturally pale and unnervingly bright glass eyes. My breath hitched. It couldn't be. It was too much of a coincidence. I requested the physical copy of the paper, my voice raspy. The librarian retrieved it from a back room, a musty, forgotten corner. The pages felt fragile in my hands, the paper threatening to disintegrate with each touch. I found the article. It was short, buried between an advertisement for a new brand of detergent and a report on local council meetings. Child's play turned sinister. The headline read, a question mark that felt like a marking jab. The article spoke of a doll, found by a group of children playing near the old railway tracks. The date was seared into my memory. It was the same week I'd first seen her. A tremor ran through me, a physical manifestation of the fear I'd been holding at bay for so long. The house, it had to be here. My grandmother, she'd been so secretive, so guarded about the past. She'd never spoken of Leela, never acknowledged her existence. But he had kept her. He had to have kept her. I let myself in, the familiar creak of the front door echoing through the cavernous hall. The scent of decay, of forgotten things, was more potent. I moved through the rooms, a phantom in my own inheritance. Each step was deliberate, my senses on high alert. I searched the dusty attics, the cluttered storage rooms, the forgotten nooks and crannies of the sprawling house. My hands trembled as I pushed aside piles of moth-eaten fabric, overturned boxes filled with yellowed photographs and brittle letters. It was in my grandmother's old sewing room, a place I'd avoided until now, that I found it. Tucked away in a large, ornate wooden chest, beneath a layer of faded velvet fabric, was a doll. My breath caught. It was Leela. He was larger than I remembered, her porcelain face eerily smooth, her painted lips curved into a faint, unsettling smile. Her hair, a cascade of black silk, was still perfectly arranged. Her dress, a delicate lace, was pristine, as if untouched by time. The scent of lavender, my grandmother's signature perfume, mingled with something else, something foul and cloying, like stale perfume and decay. I could feel a prickling sensation on my skin, as if unseen eyes were watching me. The air grew heavy, suffocating. My muscles tensed, ready to flee, but my feet were rooted to the spot. It wasn't possible. Dolls didn't move, but hers had. I knew it. I remembered it. My fingers brushed against the cool, smooth porcelain of her cheek. What had my grandmother done with her all these years? The smell of old paper clung to me, a damp, musty shroud. Each breath felt heavy, as if I were inhaling the very essence of forgotten years. Sunlight, thin and watery, struggled through the dirt-caked panes of the library with newspaper archives from 1970, illuminating swirling galaxies of dust. It was here, surrounded by the brittle ghosts of headlines and faded photographs, that I sought answers. Answers about my grandmother, about this house, and about the creeping dread that had taken root in my gut since my arrival. I ran my fingers over a stack of newspapers, the rough texture of the paper a stark contrast to the smooth, unnerving feel of Leela's porcelain skin. The silence pressed in, not empty but full, as if the room itself held its breath, waiting. A floorboard creaked upstairs. My head snapped up. It was an old house, I told myself. Old houses groan and settle, but this creak was different. It sounded deliberate. A slow, dragging sound, like something being pulled across the wooden floor. My heart, that traitorous organ, began to thrum against my ribs. I tried to focus on the task at hand, on the yellowed pages spread before me, my grandmother's name. I sifted through articles, my eyes scanning for familiar surnames, for any mention of a child, of a doll. Nothing. just the mundane chronicles of a world long past. Another sound. It slithered from the periphery of my hearing, too soft to make out words, but undeniably there. I froze, straining to catch it again. I could feel the tiny hairs on my neck prickle. I needed to move to break the spell of this room. As I turned, my gaze fell upon a small, leather-bound journal tucked beneath a pile of newspapers. It was my grandmother's handwriting, cramped and spidery, on the cover. My hands trembled as I picked it up. This was it. This had to be it. I opened it to a random page. The ink was faded, the paper brittle. The entry was dated decades ago. She watches, always watches. Her painted eyes follow. It's her, isn't it? The child's toy, but it's more than a toy now. Hungry, what did that even mean? I flipped to another page. The laughter. It echoes in the empty rooms, not a child's laughter. Wrong, it's in the walls, it's in the air, it's in me. My breath hitched. Laughter. I'd heard it, hadn't I? Faint like distant bells, but with an unsettling, marking undertone. I remembered dismissing it as the wind, as the house settling. But now, reading these words, the dismissals felt like desperate lies. I heard it again, louder this time. A giggle, high-pitched, childlike, but laced with something utterly sinister. I whipped my head around, my eyes darting, searching. But the giggle persisted, a phantom sound that seemed to burrow into my skull. It was followed by a rustling, a dry, brittle sound like dead leaves skittering across pavement. I could feel a tightness in my chest, a desperate urge to flee, to escape this suffocating stillness. My hands clenched into fists, my grip tight. I forced myself to stand my ground. I wouldn't let this place break me, not again. I looked down at the journal, my gaze fixed on the words that seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy. She wants what was taken. She remembers. And she will make me remember too. What was taken? What did she remember? My eyes scanned the room again, my senses on high alert. There was a flicker of movement, a fleeting glimpse of something small, something pale, darting just out of sight. I blinked and it was gone. But the impression remained, a phantom image seared into my vision. My skin crawled. I clutched the journal tighter, my knuckles aching. The air grew thick, cloying, the scent of old paper now mingled with something else. Something faintly floral, like dried funeral wreaths. It was a sickly, sweet perfume, and it made my stomach churn. It was a scent I hadn't smelled in years, a scent I had tried desperately to forget. A soft thud echoed from the hallway outside the library. My body tensed. It sounded like something small had fallen. My gaze was drawn to the doorway, to the sliver of dim light that bled from the hall. I could feel it, a palpable presence just beyond the threshold, watching me. Waiting. I swallowed, my throat dry. The journal felt strangely warm in my hand. The words on the page seemed to shift, to rearrange themselves, though I knew that was impossible. My eyes were playing tricks on me. My mind was playing tricks on me. I took a hesitant step towards the doorway, the floorboards groaning under my weight. The thud, I realized with a sickening lurch, had sounded like a doll falling, a small doll. The floral scent intensified, almost overwhelming. My breath hitched. Was she out there? Had she followed me? And if so, what did she want? The sound, that insidious titter, it slithered from the edges of the room. I strained my ears, my body rigid, listening. Was it real? Or was it just the house groaning, a symphony of rot and decay I'd grown accustomed to? The old wood of the library floorboards creaked beneath my weight as I shifted, the sound amplified in the sudden, suffocating silence. My fingers, still slick with the ink from the newspaper clippings, trembled. The words I'd just read, a frantic scrawl in my grandmother's journal, echoed in my mind. She whispers, and now she paints. Paint, the word snagged in my throat. My own hands, usually steady, stained with charcoal and oil, felt alien, my art. It had always been my sanctuary, my escape. But lately, it felt like a cage. The canvases I'd been working on, the ones that were supposed to be a triumphant return to form, were becoming wrong. I'd started them with a fierce determination, fueled by a desperate need to reclaim my sanity, to prove to myself that I was more than just a vessel for my grandmother's madness. But the colors had soured, the lines had twisted, and the eyes of the subjects, they were always watching, always judging, with a vacant, doll-like stare. The laughter, fainter now, seemed to emanate from the very walls. I told myself it was the wind, whistling through a broken pane somewhere in the vast, empty house. But the windows in the library were all intact, their thick, dusty glass reflecting the dim, grey light of the afternoon. I walked over to my easel, which I'd brought down here, hoping the quiet, academic atmosphere would spark some semblance of clarity. The canvas on it was a half-finished portrait of my grandmother. Her face, as I remembered it from childhood, was a tapestry of stern lines and weary resignation. But the paint I'd applied yesterday, it had warped. Her lips, which I'd intended to set in a thin, disapproving line, now curved upwards in a disturbingly knowing smirk. And her eyes, they were no longer the faded blue I recalled. My breath hitched again. This wasn't just my hand moving. This was something else. Something guiding the brush, forcing the pigment onto the canvas in a way that felt both familiar and utterly foreign. It was like watching a stranger paint with my own hands. The air in the room grew heavy, thick with the scent of old paper and something else, something cloying and sweet, like decaying flowers. I recognized it. It was the scent that clung to Leela's dress, a perfume of dust and time and something undeniably foul. I backed away from the easel, my heart racing, a frantic bird trapped in a cage of bone. My hands clenched into fists, the nails digging into my palms. I could feel the tremor running through my entire body, a physical manifestation of the fear that was coiling in my gut. The journal. My grandmother's frantic entries spoke of Leela's influence seeping into her own creative endeavors, of the doll dictating her thoughts, her actions. She urges me to capture the sorrow, one passage read, to spill the unshed tears onto the page. It is the only way to appease her. Appease her. The thought sent a fresh wave of nausea through me. My own recent work, the canvases stacked against the far wall, they were a testament to this appeasement. I'd been so focused on my own artistic ambition, so desperate to prove my talent, that I hadn't seen how easily I'd been manipulated. Leela hadn't just stayed in my childhood nightmares. She'd followed me, burrowed into my subconscious, and now he was using my art, my very soul, as her canvas. I stumbled back, my gaze falling on a stack of old newspapers, their brittle pages fanned out on a table. The 1970, the year my parents had died, the year Leela had been active. My grandmother had been a writer, a journalist before she'd retreated into herself, her words becoming a desperate attempt to document the horrors she'd witnessed. And now I, Dean, the celebrated artist, was doing the same, but through a far more insidious medium. The laughter, it had stopped. It was the pregnant pause before a scream, the stillness before the strike. He was here, in the room, in my mind, and he was waiting for me to pick up the brush again, waiting for me to paint her story. But what story was it? And why did I feel an unbearable urge to obey? The air in the library with newspaper archives from 1970 hung thick and stale, a forgotten breath trapped between brittle pages. Dust motes danced in the single shaft of light, piercing the gloom from a grimy window, each one a tiny spectre of time. I'd spent days here, sifting through microfiche, the hum of the ancient projector a low, guttural drone that vibrated in my teeth. My eyes burned, raw and gritty, from the endless scanning. But I had to know. I had to understand what had been done to me, what my grandmother had allowed. The newspaper headlines blurred into an indistinguishable tapestry of local tragedies and mundane events. Fires, floods, the occasional bizarre animal sighting. Nothing that screamed cursed doll. My frustration was a tight knot in my chest, constricting my lungs. I'd felt her presence, of course. Leela. A constant, gnawing awareness at the edges of my perception, a phantom limb that twitched with malevolence. He was here in this house, in this town, a shadow woven into the very fabric of my inheritance. Then a small, almost insignificant article caught my eye. A brief mention of a local craftsman, a Mr. Sealer's Thorn, known for his intricate doll making. The date was close to when my grandmother had first acquired Leela, or so the scant family history suggested. I zoomed in, the grainy image sharpening into focus. Thorne's workshop, a small, cluttered space filled with the tools of his trade, and on a workbench, a doll. Not Leela, not exactly, but a precursor. Its eyes, too wide, too knowing, seemed to follow me from the screen. A chill, unrelated to the room's temperature, slithered down my spine. I cross-referenced Thorne's name with other local publications. He'd been a recluse, a man who lived and breathed his craft. He spoke of imbuing his creations with essence, with a spark of the eternal. The language was flowery, almost poetic, but the undertones were unsettling. What kind of essence? What kind of eternal? I found a follow-up article, dated a few years later. Silas Thorne had vanished. His workshop was found abandoned, ransacked. No sign of struggle, no explanation. Just an empty space, filled with the lingering scent of varnish and something else. Something acrid and metallic. The police had suspected foul play, but no leads ever surfaced. Thorne, the doll maker, had simply ceased to exist. My fingers trembled as I scrolled through the subsequent weeks of archived news. Then, a society column mention. My grandmother, a younger, vibrant woman in a photograph, attended a charity bazaar. The caption, Mrs. Elena Vance, showcasing a unique acquisition from the estate of the late Silas Thorne. My stomach lurched. She hadn't just bought Leela. She'd acquired her from the remnants of Thorne's life, from the very place he'd disappeared. I felt a prickling sensation on the back of my neck, the familiar pressure, the subtle shift in the air. Leela was watching, always watching. I needed more. I needed to understand why. A tale of a woman consumed by grief who sought out Silas Thorne. She wanted a companion, a replacement for a child lost too soon. Thorne, in his twisted genius, had agreed. He'd taken something from her, something vital, and poured it into the doll. Silas Thorne hadn't just made dolls. He'd been a conduit, a craftsman of souls. And my grandmother, he had knowingly, willingly brought this thing into our family. My gaze drifted to a faded photograph tucked into the back of a dusty scrapbook I'd found in the library's back room. It was me, a small child with wide, innocent eyes, clutching Leela. My grandmother stood beside me, her smile strained, her hand resting a little too tightly on my shoulder. The background was blurred, but I recognized it. The sunroom in this very house. The room where the nightmares had begun. A memory, sharp and visceral, pierced through the fog of years. The afternoon light, the scent of lemon polish, the cloying sweetness of my grandmother's perfume. Leela, perched on a velvet cushion, her painted smile seeming to widen. I remembered reaching for her, my small fingers brushing against her cool, smooth cheek. A voice, like dry leaves skittering across stone, promising things. Terrible, wonderful things. I saw my own small hand, reaching out again, not to touch, but to push, to shove Leela off her perch, the sickening crack as her porcelain head struck the hardwood floor. My grandmother's scream, a sound I hadn't heard in decades, but one that echoed in my bones, and then, nothing, a blank space. The newspaper archives offered no further details about that specific day, no report of a broken doll or a child's outburst. It was as if that moment, that crucial turning point, had been deliberately erased. My grandmother had never spoken of it, not to me, not to anyone. He had buried it, just as he had buried Leela's true nature, just as he had buried the truth of Silas Thorne. Why had my grandmother kept Leela? Why had she let me take her? The smell of old paper, sharp and dry like a forgotten ache, clung to my clothes. Days bled into one another within the dim confines of the library, with newspaper archives from 1970s. Each rustle of brittle newsprint felt like a whisper, a secret I was slowly coaxing from the decaying past. I'd found nothing concrete about my grandmother's dealings, only vague mentions of unusual spiritual retreats, hushed rumors of a local sect that dabbled in things best left undisturbed. It was a dead end, or so I'd thought. Then, buried deep within a local society column, a grainy photograph. A woman, younger, her face obscured by shadow, holding a doll. The caption read, Mrs. Elena Vance and her prized possession Leela at the annual county fair, 1973. My breath hitched. The doll, Leela. It was her, unmistakable even in the faded print. My grandmother. She'd kept her. All these years she'd kept her. The shaft of light from the window flickered, as if a giant, unseen hand had passed before it. I looked up, my eyes scanning the dusty panes, but saw only my own gaunt reflection staring back. The air grew heavy, pressing in on my chest, making each inhale a conscious effort. Deliberate. I packed my meager findings, the photograph tucked securely in my inner jacket pocket. The urge to leave this house, this suffocating inheritance, was a physical ache. I needed to get out, to breathe air that hadn't been stagnant for decades. My car. I'd left it parked by the overgrown drive. As I walked through the cavernous foyer, the grand staircase loomed, its mahogany banister slick with a sheen I hadn't noticed before. The portraits lining the walls, their painted eyes always seeming to follow me, now felt accusatory. The grandfather clock in the corner, its pendulum long since stilled, chimed once, a deep, resonant gong that vibrated through the floorboards and into my bones. It had never chimed before. I turned it, expecting the familiar click of the latch. Nothing. I twisted harder, my muscles straining. Still nothing. It was as if the door had been sealed shut, not by a lark, but by something far more intrinsic, something that had sunk its roots into the very wood. My gaze fell upon the small table beside the door, where a tarnished silver letter opener lay. I picked it up, its weight surprisingly substantial. I'd use it to pry the door open. As I approached the door again, a faint melody drifted from upstairs. A child's music box. A tinkling, lilting tune, achingly familiar. It was the same tune Leela used to hum, the one that always preceded her. Appearances. My blood thrummed, a frantic drumbeat against my ribs. I dropped the letter opener. It clattered on the marble floor, the sound unnaturally loud. I spun around, my eyes darting towards the grand staircase. A small, pale hand, just my imagination playing tricks. This house, this place, was doing something to me. I forced myself to turn back to the door. The music box had stopped. I reached for the knob again, my fingers trembling. It wouldn't budge. I kicked at the solid wood, the impact jarring my leg. The door remained stubbornly shut, a marking, unyielding barrier. Then a soft thud from the room directly above the foyer, my old bedroom. I hadn't been in there since I'd arrived. A wave of apprehension washed over me. I looked back at the door, then up the stairs. The air felt thicker, charged with an unseen energy. The portraits on the wall seemed to sneer. The stillness of the house was no longer peaceful. It was predatory. Where had the music box sound come from, and why did it feel like it was meant just for me? The musty air of the library with newspaper archives from 1970 pressed in, thick with the ghosts of ink and forgotten days. Each brittle page I turned felt like a betrayal, a fresh wound opened in the silence. I'd found the articles, buried deep within the crumbling stacks, not about my grandmother, not directly, but about the house, about a series of disappearances, young women in the late 70s. Around the time my grandmother had acquired the property, the names blurred on the page, smudged by time and my own trembling fingers. There was a recurring mention of a local craft fair, a vendor who sold antique toys, a vendor who, according to one faded clipping, was known for her peculiar dolls. Leela. My breath hitched. The air grew colder, not with the chill of the old house, but with something far more invasive. It felt like a breath on my neck, a touch I couldn't see. I forced myself to focus, to read the grainy photographs accompanying the articles. Faces, pale and hopeful, frozen in time. And then a picture of the vendor. An older woman, her smile thin and sharp, her eyes like chips of obsidian. The same porcelain skin, the same vacant stare, the same impassably precise stitch of her smile. My stomach churned. This wasn't just a doll. It was a beacon, a lure. The library, usually a sanctuary of quiet research, now felt like a trap. I could hear it then, a faint, almost imperceptible sound beneath the rustle of paper, a child's giggle. High-pitched and thin, it seemed to echo from the very walls. My hand instinctively went to the heavy brass paperweight on the desk, its cool weight a small comfort. I scanned the room, my eyes darting from the towering shelves to the dusty chandeliers. Nothing. But the giggle persisted, weaving its way into the fabric of my thoughts. I remembered the stories Grandma used to tell, fragments of hushed warnings about keeping things out, about sealing away certain energies. Now the pieces clicked into place with a sickening thud. The disappearances, the craft fair, the doll. My grandmother hadn't just owned this house, she'd been its keeper. And Leela had been a distinct, deliberate sound. Not the settling of an old house, but the weight of a footfall. My heart, which had been a dull ache, now hammered against my ribs. I stood, the newspaper pages scattering around me like fallen leaves. The giggle grew louder, closer. It seemed to be coming from the grand hall. The air crackled with an unseen energy, a palpable static that raised the fine hairs on my arms. I had to face her. I couldn't run anymore. Not from this, not from Leela. Gripping the paperweight, I moved towards the library door. The wood felt slick and clammy under my hand, as if it were weeping. The giggling stopped abruptly, replaced by a low, guttural hum that vibrated through the floorboards and into the soles of my worn boots. It was a sound that scraped against my nerves, promising unspeakable things. I took a step, then another, my movements stiff and jerky. The hum intensified, a discordant symphony that seemed to originate from the very heart of the mansion. It was a sound that promised unraveling, a promise of everything I had fought so hard to keep buried. I could feel her attention, a burning focus, like 1,000 tiny needles pricking at my mind. Reaching the grand hall, I stopped. The air here was thick, cloying, heavy with the scent of decay and something else. Something sickly sweet, like overripe fruit. And there, at the foot of the sweeping staircase, bathed in the weak, intermittent light of the gas lamps, sat Leela. He was perched on the bottom step, her porcelain face tilted upwards, her painted eyes fixed on me. She hadn't moved, not really, but he was different. Her dress, the faded blue calico I remembered, seemed to shimmer with an inner light. And her smile was wider now, stretching impassably across her cheeks, revealing not teeth, but tiny, sharp fragments of glass. The hum emanated from her, a resonant thrum that seemed to vibrate in my very marrow. It was a song of possession, a song of homecoming. The newspaper clippings, the disappearances, the craft fair, they were just the prelude. The true horror was here in the flesh, or rather in the porcelain and thread. My hands clenched around the paperweight, my grip tight. The ink on my fingers from the archives felt like a brand. This was my house, my past, and he would not have it. But as I met her vacant, glittering gaze, I saw something shift within those painted eyes. A flicker, a recognition, and then a slow, deliberate blink. Was she truly looking at me or through me? Not about my grandmother, not directly. They spoke of a series of disappearances, local children, each vanishing without a trace within a mile radius of this house. The dates, they lined up, too perfectly. My childhood nightmare wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a pattern, a horrific, repeating cycle. My fingers, stained with the faded print of decades past, trembled as I traced the smudged headlines. Missing boy last seen near Old Manse. Community scours woods for lost child. The language was so clinical, so detached, and yet the desperation bled through the faded ink. It chilled me more than the damp air seeping from the stone walls. My grandmother. She hadn't just been a lonely eccentric. She'd been a witness, or worse. A faint scratching sound, like tiny claws on wood, echoed from the hallway. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. It was the same sound, the one I'd heard that night so long ago. The sound that had drawn me to the attic, to her. Leela, the doll. She wasn't just a plaything. He was a lure, a conduit. I slammed the archive shut, the sound deafening in the stillness. A profound silence descended, heavier than before, pregnant with a new, terrifying understanding. The disappearances weren't random acts of a troubled mind. They were offerings. My grandmother's grim pact, and I, a child, had been her intended sacrifice. My gaze swept across the room, landing on the dusty, ornate grandfather clock in the corner. Its pendulum swung with a slow, rhythmic tick, a relentless march of time that felt like a countdown. I'd always hated that clock. The way it seemed to watch me, its brass face a sneering, impassive observer. Now, it felt like it was ticking down to my own end. My skin prickled, 1,000 tiny needles dancing across my surface. I could feel it, a presence, waiting for me to return. I pushed myself up from the rickety chair, my legs stiff and aching. The newspaper clippings lay scattered around me, a testament to the grim truth I'd unearthed. He was the key, the object of power, a soft, deliberate sound, not the settling of an old house. This was a step, heavy, measured. I told myself it was just the wind, the house groaning under the weight of years. I backed away from the archive table, my eyes darting towards the heavy oak door of the library. The scratching sound returned, louder this time, closer. It was coming from the hallway just outside. My hand instinctively went to my chest, my fingers fumbling for the small, tarnished locket I wore. It was a habit, a desperate comfort from my childhood. It had been my grandmother's. The doorknob began to turn, slowly, deliberately. I could smell it now. A faint, sickly, sweet perfume like rotting flowers. It was the scent of Leela, the scent of her malice. I stumbled back, my heel catching on the leg of a nearby chair. I braced for the impact, but before I could fall, a deep, resonant voice echoed from the hallway. Dean. It was him, the investigator, the one who'd been asking questions about the house, about my grandmother. He'd been so persistent, so ordinary, a beacon of normalcy in this suffocating decay. The doorknob stopped turning. The scratching sound ceased entirely. Dean, are I in there? He called again, his voice laced with concern. I wanted to answer, to call out, to beg for help. But the words caught in my throat, choked by a primal fear. He wouldn't understand. He couldn't. He hadn't seen her. He hadn't heard the scratching. The scent of decaying flowers intensified, filling my lungs. I could feel it pressing in, a suffocating weight that threatened to crush me. The investigator's voice faded into a distant hum, but I heard it. A swirling, inky blackness that seemed to absorb all light, all sound, or rather, I felt her. Her porcelain smile, cracked and ancient, her button eyes gleaming with a malevolent intelligence. The investigator's voice, now panicked, called my name again, further away this time. But it was too late. When I finally came to, the library was silent. The newspapers were still scattered, but the inky blackness was gone. The scent of rotting flowers had faded. The investigator was gone. I was alone. I staggered out of the library, my legs like lead. The house felt different, quieter, as if it had finally consumed what it craved. I looked at my hands. They were still stained with ink, but the trembling had stopped. I walked through the silent halls, the familiar decay now feeling like a part of me. I knew Leela was gone, or rather he had taken me, a part of me. The investigator would find no evidence, no explanation, just a man broken by a house and its secrets. As I reached the grand staircase, I paused. My reflection in the dusty, tarnished mirror caught my eye. The house was mine now, or perhaps I was its. The cycle was broken, or had it just found a new vessel? It had merely found a new home, and I, Dean, was it.